Hi there. Thanks for tuning into my presentation today. My name is Steph Vasco, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. Today, I will share with you how we at the COH use and think about graphic design to mobilize knowledge. My presentation is the first in a three-part series showcasing the knowledge mobilization, design, and communications work we do at the COH. Following my presentation, I encourage you to check out the next two. In the second presentation, Naveen will walk you through developing a communication strategy to help you effectively plan to share your research and to ensure it's reaching the broadest audience possible. Then, once you've developed your strategy, move on to the third presentation where you'll be able to put what you've learned in action by following Lindsay's tips for sharing research via social media. She'll also demonstrate using Canva, a free design tool that can turn anyone into a professional graphic designer. With Canva, you'll be able to create infographics and other images to help your social media content and research stand out. So before I dive in, I wanted to give you a little bit of a background on the COH. We are a research and policy partnership between academics, policy and decision makers, service providers, and people with lived experience of homelessness. We work in collaboration with our partners to conduct and mobilize research designed to have an impact on solutions to homelessness. The COH, or as we were known prior, the Canadian Homelessness Research Network, emerged out of the first ever homelessness conference in Canada in 2005, and it was held at York University. Our president and CEO, Stephen Gates, was one of the conference organizers. Turnout at the event was so great, and through conversations with attendees, it became clear that the creation of a homelessness research network would help increase collaboration between researchers working in various disciplines across the country. In 2008, we received a SSHRC grant to kick off the network. In the decades since, we've evolved to support researchers and the homelessness sector beyond just networking. One of the key objectives of the COH is to build a collective and consistent understanding of homelessness in Canada. We know that to implement effective solutions, we must first understand the causes and consequences of homelessness. So I'll touch on a couple of these. Over the years, we've worked on contributing to establishing an evidence base of information. One example of this is through our State of Homelessness in Canada report series, which we designed in collaboration with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. The State of Homelessness in Canada series is essentially a report card of how many people are experiencing homelessness in Canada. We've also worked to create a shared language across the sector because we know that to develop collective solutions to homelessness, we need consistent vocabulary. What does it mean to be homeless in Canada? How does homelessness differ for groups such as youth and Indigenous peoples? What do we really mean by ending homelessness? These are questions that we try to answer. And to build consistency across the country, the COH, in collaboration with dozens of partners, has authored 3 definitions: the Canadian definition of homelessness, the Canadian definition of youth homelessness, and the definition of Indigenous homelessness. We've also worked extensively on informing policy by publishing a number of policy briefs over the years. The way that we look at addressing homelessness today is really focused on a crisis intervention response. And that's providing emergency shelter supports like shelter, food, and day programs while someone is experiencing homelessness. Our proposed model really flips that and focuses more on preventing and sustaining exits from homelessness. Prevention really is just stopping people from becoming homeless in the first place. And then for those that unfortunately can avert a crisis, moving them out of homelessness as quickly as possible, using housing, accommodation, and supports to move them out of homelessness. Our goal as an organization overall is to make research accessible, understandable, usable, and relevant to the broadest audience possible. One way we do this is through our website, the Homelessness Learning Hub. The Homelessness Learning Hub launched last summer and was created to support professional development and capacity building for the homelessness sector. It's an open access platform that hosts practical tools and resources for the sector. It also includes courses with self-paced modules that folks can just take at their own pace at their own time. Another way we mobilize knowledge is through our website, other website, the Homeless Hub. The Homeless Hub has been around now for over a decade and has over 30,000 resources. The resources include journal articles, reports, and things like infographics and videos that we've collected over the years. It also hosts all of the research that we've produced as well. We also have a weekly blog, or a blog, sorry, that we publish on a weekly basis. So to get a bit of understanding about how we work, I want to move back a little bit and share how traditional academic publishing works, because this is not the model that we follow at all. Generally, academics create, review, and edit content for free. They then pass off this material to a production company, a journal company, that then produces designs and distributes this work. Academics and institutions then pay to access this content. The problem with this model, while we know it's essential for academics, is that the cost to access this material is quite prohibitive for many, and the language itself is not accessible, so the audience for it is also quite limited. The design of journal articles hasn't really changed in the last several decades either. This is an example of an article that was published in 1963, and it just asks you to take note of the layout and design of this particular article. The design itself is really just black and white. There's not really much thought given beyond that. And here's an article published in 2019 where you can see, similar to the one published in 1963, there hasn't been much thought to the actual design. It's just a block of text in black and white. Whereas here's an excerpt from an article that we've published recently with the major findings report, or a major findings page in a report. And we really focus on highlighting the key messages using infographics, plain language, and color, and smaller blocks of text to help emphasize and help make it more legible. We refer to the way that we work internally as design thinking. And design thinking is really a collaborative approach that involves both the research team and the communications teams at the COH. We work together to produce and design and disseminate the research together. And the goal of doing this work this way is to increase the impact of research. Here's generally what our process looks like, and we work with the research team through all of this. We work to determine who the audience is and what the outputs might be, whether the report needs a blog to accompany it or if there'll be a webinar. We then work with the team to outline the story. So if there's an infographic involved, what is the story of the report? How can we distill it into an infographic or into a blog? Then we work together to conceptualize ideas. What's the design direction and what will the final outputs look like? We then pass the work off to our graphic designers who help us then actually design the material. And then there's a review and refine process between the research team and the communications team where we're back and forth to ensure that the designs are reflective of the research. And then lastly, we work with the researchers to actually release the material using a communication strategy. Naveen in the next presentation will actually walk you through what our communication strategy looks like and how you can set one up yourself. Here's an example of several reports that we've produced over the years, but what's key about all of them is that they were all produced in collaboration with researchers and partners across the country. None of this work was produced solely in-house. We really value the importance of relationships and collaboration in all the work that we do, because we know that it creates a stronger product overall. So similar to the academic publishing process, all of our works are also run through a peer review process. But unlike academic publishing, our work is all produced through an open access policy. We encourage folks to download and share and use it, provided they attribute the work. Here's how we consider research outputs. So in this graphic, you see at the bottom is the research report. It's really foundational to the work that we're mobilizing. But these additional layers, so here we have videos, infographics, social media content, blog posts, etc. You'll see like all of these materials are different access points to the research report. In a video and infographic, for example, we would always link back to the main research report. We do this because we know people access content in different ways. Someone may be satisfied with just viewing a video, they might get all the information they need, and others may want to dive a bit deeper and go into the exec summary or the research report itself. So we give people these various access points. to access the actual content. Another way of looking at it is through this pyramid philosophy, which helps us decide, how complex a certain channel is, and then how broad an audience or how small an audience it may reach. So, for example, with social media, we know content shared on social media is not very complex, but the audience is also quite broad as a result. Whereas if you scroll down a little further, you see like peer-reviewed journal articles and technical reports are quite heavy, they're quite complex. So as a result, the audience is also quite small. You don't reach as large of an audience when it's more technical content you're working with. Here's an example of how we would actually layer, what layering in action looks like. So in the center, we have our roadmap for the prevention of youth homelessness. That's the main report, that's the foundation of the work. Whereas around it, you see a blog post, a webinar, the exec summary, social media content, and infographic. All of these various layers all link back to the main report. They were all created with different purposes in mind, different channels, like social media, for example, and the blog, all reach different people, and people access this content in different ways. So as you can tell by now, graphic design is quite important in the way that we work and important to the work that we do. We really consider the cover design and making sure that fonts and colors are consistent throughout our work, and that layouts are engaging to keep people reading and to keep them engaged with the work. We also rely heavily on infographics to distill research content into much smaller chunks. And infographics are great because we can share them across social media and they get a lot more traction that way rather than just a block of text. So now I'll dive into how we actually do the work. So here's an example of how we might outline a story working with a researcher. We ask researchers to help us identify the key points in the research to help us tell their story. We ask them to also answer major questions about the work. So what is the program? Who does the program support? Is the program effective? Because we know the audience might be asking these questions as well. So we want to use that to create the content or help us create the content. We've also worked with researchers that are not graphic designers, but they understand the importance of infographics and work with us to design an infographic effectively. So this researcher took it upon herself to actually draw out how she thinks the layout of the infographic should go and how the story of her research should be told. Another researcher helped us by designing an infographic just in Word using simple icons to convey what she wanted us to say. Others simply just give us an Excel document that we then work with to determine the final output. Here's how that researcher's illustration, that paper drawing turned out. So we took her ideas and kind of refined them a little bit to make it a consistent infographic. And in this example, we further refined that researcher's suggestion to simply say 1 in 3 youth experiencing homelessness graduate high school versus 9 in 10 housed youth. It's a much simpler way to showcase her research. And the review and refine stage is really integral to our work. You'll see here on the left, our graphic designer accurately conveyed that 25 to 40% of youth experiencing homelessness self-identified as LGBTQ. But when we showed this to the researcher, she said, this really isn't conveying the diversity in this population. So then on the right, we redesigned the infographic to show that diversity. Design is really about problem solving, and we do this problem solving as a team to ensure the design is capturing the message of the research accurately. So here's an example of a diagram from a report we released recently on hidden homelessness among women and girls and gender diverse people. This is the original graphic that our graphic designer designed, and showcasing the various places you may find women experiencing homelessness. When we shared it with the research team, one of the researchers came back to us with this quote, and I'll read it out for you. She said, "This diagram does not capture what you are trying to convey. The picture just looks too good. These structures don't look like the deplorable housing that is inadequate, overcrowded. poverty, this looks like downtown residential commercial mix, not a place that women are truly finding themselves. If you want to see more closely captures the realities of women facing homelessness and precarious housing, try looking at the address, and she provides an address in Windsor on Google Maps. Even if you take the street view, you will have a sense of what the women I know who are in substandard housing, depending on survival sex, or in sheer poverty face. This diagram does not begin to capture those realities. It's too pretty. So we worked with that feedback to redesign the graphic to show a better, a more clear picture of what the housing might look like. It's not these perfect buildings. It's buildings that, you know, may be in need of repair. We kind of, we showed here possibly a gas station and more crowded buildings to show the actual living conditions someone may be found in. And we also included a note, this figure 1 at the bottom, to emphasize our choice for this design. So this feedback process is incredibly important to the work that we do, because as the communications and graphic design team, we want to ensure that the research and the research is being conveyed accurately through design, and we're not just designing things to look pretty. Another example here, and this is actually what became of that Excel sheet I showed you earlier. We took the researchers' statistics to showcase household food insecurity across Canada for each province and territory. And we emphasized the provinces and territories that had the highest and the lowest rates of food insecurity across Canada. But when we showed it to the researcher, she said, yes, this is accurate. However, the message I want to convey is that none of the provinces and territories are doing well. All of these provinces and territories should be at 0% of household food insecurity. So we redesigned the graphic with less of an emphasis on the provinces doing well and not so well. And instead just made a more even playing field by keeping the percentages all the same size throughout and using a bit of color to highlight the highs and lows instead. So it's less of an emphasis that way. I'd like to leave you with a design challenge case study that our team faced recently. We were asked by a colleague to design a visual to depict the disconnect between food banks and food insecurity across Canada. She gave us some key words to work with and to help us think about what the design could look like. She was really picturing something very visual. So the key words she chose were disconnect, band-aid solution, scale of the problem, and drop in the bucket. So these were the key words that we worked with to design some examples for her. So we decided to choose the band-aid solution as the imagery to work with for this particular graphic. So on the left here, we had used a Band-Aid as a bridge over, you can see these people reaching out, trying to get support through food banks. And then on the right here, we have a mug that's been taped up by a Band-Aid, but clearly it's not an effective solution. The liquid's still leaking out. And these were the two graphics we had proposed to her. She narrowed it down to this particular graphic because she felt the message was strongest and was being strongly conveyed through this particular graphic. So she shared it with some of her colleagues and came back to us to say, you know, one of my colleagues pointed out that these hands actually look like they're zombies, that people are, you know, desperate for food and they're reaching out and they really just look like zombies to her. And at that point, we couldn't unsee this visual, and that's all we could see now going forward. So we decided to go back to the drawing board and forget the Band-Aid solution idea and focus on something else. So we went back to her keywords, dropped Band-Aid solution, and decided to start over. We used this concept of an insignificant ladder amongst really tall, impossibly tall skyscrapers. And that was the visual that we landed on, and that she agreed was the best representation to use. In the end, we finessed the graphic. This was the final result, the final visual here. And we then included the graphic within a research summary that provided more context around it. So that's it for my presentation today. I really encourage you to check out Naveen and Lindsay's presentations next to learn more about how we actually mobilize the knowledge, how we use social media to do that, and how we plan using a communications plan to effectively get the knowledge out to a broad audience. Thanks for your time today.